All right, guys, so now that you have a whole arsenal of tools under your belt to be able to walk away with unbelievable shots of the underground in your camera using minimal equipment, I'm going to talk about one of the best kept secrets of the minimalist cave photographer, and that is Photoshop and compositing. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can take a couple of okay shots underground and merge them together in Photoshop and walk away with an unbelievable shot. The other thing that's really cool about compositing with this technique that I'm going to show you is that you can basically take the whole cave photography experience with you into the computer so that you can actually turn on and turn off lights, increase and decrease the intensity after the fact in Photoshop, and have full control of how your shot ultimately turns out. This is a technique that I came up with several years ago when I was shooting for the History Channel. They'd asked me to go down and help with a project they were doing in Guatemala, and as part of this project, they were trying to figure out how can they take, because you're limited with lighting underground in very remote areas, especially when it comes to video, and you've got a lot of continuous light being output. You need a lot of, you need a heavy generator, and you just don't carry that stuff with you. So how could we light up a massive chamber and have a person walking through it underground and make this work using both still images and video? So the videographer and I sat down and we kind of talked about how we were going to be able to do this and using both stills and video. And unfortunately, with the show, there was one guy that ended up dislocating multiple limbs, and so we had to cut out the day where we implemented this technique. But I spent a lot of time mulling over it, and then after this shoot, I started thinking, how can I make this work? So I began playing with this underground, and after a time ended up perfecting it and came away with some really cool things. So we're going to talk about how you can do that with still images, composite multiple images, and have full control after the fact, and how you can do that with video. So with that said, let's jump over into Photoshop. I'm going to walk you through this technique. So we're actually going to begin in Lightroom. But before I talk about Lightroom and Photoshop, one thing that I did want to mention is that you don't need to go out there and fork out, hundreds or thousands of dollars on software, jump into a monthly fee or anything like that in order to do what I'm going to be showing you. In this tutorial, in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about some core concepts that you need in the digital realm in order to accomplish some really cool compositing. It's kind of like what we talked about, earlier in the course. I gave you a set of tools, but I didn't really specify that you must use, the Canon whatever camera, the latest and greatest, most expensive thing. It doesn't really matter. What matters, there are core things that you need, core principles that you need to exist in your camera in order to take good cave photography. And as long as those things are there, it doesn't really matter. So there are other options out there besides Lightroom and besides Photoshop. One of those, let me jump over here to Safari. One of those is GIMP, and GIMP is a free open source image editor that you can download on Windows or a Mac or Linux, depending on whatever operating system you use. And it's got a lot of really powerful features. A lot of the things, if not all of them, that we're going to be talking about today in this lesson are present in GIMP. So you can download it for free. You can do everything that we're going to be, talking about. It may not run quite as smoothly as Photoshop, but the end result is going to be the same. So GIMP's a great option. If you want to fork out a little bit of money, what you can do is come over to Google and do a search for low cost or inexpensive photo editing software, and there are a lot of options. What you're going to want to look for when if you're going to purchase one of these is, does it have all of the features that we're going to be talking about today? So again, we're going to focus on principles, on core concepts, and then you'll have to go out and find what software has those features so that I can do what we're going to be talking about today. All right, let's go ahead and jump back over to Lightroom. So I'm going to begin by selecting the photos that I shot underground. So you can see I went in and I set up my tripod, locked it down as good as I could, and then I had my friend walk through the scene and fire off the flash. So he fired it off here, that's one shot. Fired it off here, another shot. Cameras again locked down as good as I could. We're going to find in a second that it actually shifted a little bit, but that's a good thing because I can show you how do you deal with that. Here's the next shot. So you can see it's a series of my friend walking through, firing off the flash. Sometimes he fired it off once. Sometimes I had him fire it off 3-4 times because it was kind of a big room. So that's the shot series. So let's go ahead and open these now in Photoshop. So to do that from Lightroom, I'm going to click on the first image I want to grab and shift click to select the last one. And then I'll right click on these images and go up to Edit In, Open as Layers in Photoshop. So we'll click that and it'll start to run through its magic. And once it's done, you'll have something that's like this. So you've got the single file, but it's made up of a whole bunch of layers. It's basically, if we jump back over to Lightroom, taken all of these photos and pulled them into a single file as layers. Now, if you don't have Lightroom and you've just got Photoshop, you can always open up individual shots. So let's say this is one shot and here's another one that I've opened. Now it's the same shot, so let's turn that first layer off so you can see. So there's one image, there's another image. I can do a couple of things. One is I can select this entire frame here in this single shot. So I can go up to Select and Select All. And then I can just do Control-C or Control-C or Command-C, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, to copy it. And then we'll come over here and hit Command or Control-V, and that will paste it right in the middle. So that's what you want. The other thing that you can do, so I'm going to delete that layer because I don't actually need that layer, is drag and drop. And again, it's going to depend on what application you're using and what you can and you can't do. Every application may be a little different. What you ultimately need to do is make sure that you've got all of the photos in a single file as layers. So if it opens as a separate window like this, I can always just grab the Move tool, click it, drag it, and drop it over here. So we'll do that. And there I've got my layer created. Now, when I do it this way, you'll notice it doesn't come in right in the center like it did when I copied and pasted. So I'm then going to have to grab it and then move it over and make sure that that's, centered perfectly, more or less. So it might take a little bit more finagling than just copy and pasting. But those are some options that you've got to create a file with multiple layers that you shot while you're out there underground. So I'm going to delete that layer. Let's turn these back on. So once I've got my layers in here, the next thing that I want to do is label these layers, because it's going to get a bit complex when we start working with this many layers. So we want to keep them clean and organized so we can tell which layer is which. So I'm going to go through and rename each of these layers so it doesn't look like they're named the same. They're all slightly different. You can see in the end, the first part of the file name is the same, but the last part is just a bunch of numbers. So I'm going to rename these. So I'll go ahead and call this one Center, Background, Right. Call this one Right. So once you've got your layers all named, something that makes sense, the next thing that we need to do is make sure that they're aligned. So to align them, I'm going to find a reference point and turn on and off layers just to see if they look like they're perfectly registered or perfectly aligned. So let's just start with the top layer. I'm just going to turn that on and off, on and off. All right, I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so I can see what's going on down here. And maybe I use these rocks as reference. Let's see. There's a good reference point right there, that rock. So as I turn that on and off, that rock doesn't budge at all, which means it's perfectly aligned or perfectly registered. So we'll turn that off. Let's try the next layer. All right, this time I'm seeing a shift. I can use that rock still because it appears in both shots. Oh, and let me mention as well, so I've been using some keyboard shortcuts here. These are temporary keyboard shortcuts, which means as long as I hold the key down, the mouse will change, the cursor will change, and when I let it go, it turns back. So the one that I use a lot when I'm navigating here through Photoshop, this may work as well in GIMP and other applications, is the spacebar and command key or control key, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, will turn it into the zoom tool. So that'll allow me to zoom in and out, depending on how I drag. On some of the older applications, to zoom in, you hit Control or Command Spacebar. To zoom out, you have to hold the Option key down. So that comes in really handy. Another one I use a lot is just the Spacebar. As long as I hold that down, it turns into the Hand tool, which allows me to pan through the shot. So I use those quite a bit. You'll see me toggling back and forth between those. When I let go of both of those, it goes to whatever tool I have selected here, which right now is the Move tool. Okay, so back to this. Whenever I click that on and off, I can see that this rock here shifts up and down. So we need to correct that. So what I'm going to do is select this top layer, change the opacity to 50%, and there you can see now, you can see through this layer to the layer beneath it, and I can see it's not quite registered, it's not quite aligned. So I'm going to grab and move the layer until it aligns. Now what's important here is that I grab the right layer in order to make this happen. So I'm not going to grab the top layer. I could, and I could move it so it aligns, but what happens when I do that? Well, these two layers were perfectly registered. They were perfectly aligned. So if I move this one, now it's out of alignment with this one. So I move the lowest layer that I'm looking at to make sure I don't mess up the alignment of these top layers. So we'll click that. Let's drag it down a bit, right to there. And then I'm going to use the up and down arrow keys just to fine tune that. That moves it at about a pixel at a time. And I just find the spot where the image overall looks pretty darn sharp. And that's going to tell me that that is perfectly registered. So back and forth. Right there looks pretty good. Let's test it and see. So I've clicked on the layer up above. Let's bring the opacity back up to 100%. Turn that on and off. Still feels like that rock's moving a little bit. So we're going to come back here again. And let's move that up just a little bit here, probably right about there. Let's try that. Let's move it down one more. There we go, perfect. Okay, let's bring our opacity back up, turn that on and off, not budging at all, perfectly registered. Move down to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to have to change my reference point here because that rock is no longer available. So let's use the snow this time. So we'll turn that on and off. And I'm not noticing any shift at all. So I think we're pretty safe in saying that that is pretty darn registered. So we'll come down to the next one. On and off. Oop, shift going on. And I think this time, it looks like this little point here will probably serve as a good reference point. So let's zoom in a little bit more. Oops, let's see. That's the layer we want. So turn on and off. Let's change the opacity on that upper layer. And there I can see the shift. So let's, now since I selected this layer, I have the tendency sometimes to just jump over and move it. I need to make sure that I'm moving that layer beneath it, not that layer again. So we click the one beneath it. Let's shift that down to get it lined up. There, oops. Sometimes my mouse is a little finicky. So put that there. Let's nudge it just a little bit. It's looking pretty good. Let's change the opacity here back to 100%. Okay, perfectly registered. Good. Now, one thing I want to say, I'm shifting this a little bit. If you have slight movement, that's really not a huge deal. But if you've got significant movement and you're shooting with a wide angle lens, because of the distortion that occurs, sometimes when you shift and you move the layers a little bit, it may align perfectly over here, but then as you get farther towards the edges, the alignment doesn't work, and there is nothing you can do to make that aligned. Well, you could probably use some warping and features, but that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you're probably not going to get it perfect. So it's really important that when you're underground, you make sure that that tripod is locked down really, really solid. All right, let's go back to our cleaning up here. So that is looking pretty good. Let's move on to the next one. Let's see, did I turn the opacity back to where it needs to be? Yep, did. Okay. So time to look for another reference point here. I'm going to zoom out just to see what I can see. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit tricky because I've got a little bit of overlap maybe in the middle here. And maybe something else I could do. Let's take a look at one of the layers up above. There we go. And let's turn this off. That'd probably work. Looks like I got a reference point that could work pretty well right there. So that rock, and it is not budging at all. Good. Next layer. Okay, let's find a reference point. Okay, some of these can get a little bit tricky because I'm having a huge shift in the shadows here. So just looking at this shot, oops, let's see if we can find a point. Oh, there we go. That rock right there, I'm not seeing a lot of change. And if I turn that on and off, that's not budging. So we're good on that layer. But you can see that it could get pretty tricky when you're dealing with all kinds of shadows, because since the shadows shift, it's hard to tell, is that the shadows shifting or is that the actual subject shifting? And I was able to find a good solid reference point, so I can kind of guarantee or verify that that is that's the subject is not moving, it's the shadows moving. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, and again, looks like we're pretty good on this one. Nice and aligned. The shadows are shifting slightly, but that's no concern to us. And then the last layer. Okay, where's a good reference point? Maybe this rock down here. It's going to be a tricky one, it looks like. So I'm going to use that sliver of a line right there and see if I can align it. So let's adjust the opacity on that. Turn that on and off. Still a little bit off on those rocks. Let's see, how do they, looks like these. And you know what? This may be one of those instances where I'm getting some of that shift. You can see that these rocks are slightly distorted from one shot to another. That could be the light or it could be the lens. If it's a lens, then I may be in a little bit of trouble. If it's the light, maybe just a little shift might take care of it. So let's nudge that up a little bit. Let's take our opacity down here. All right, well, for time's sake, I think I'm just going to call that good enough. I could spend a lot of time in here going through and making sure that aligns, but I think you get the point on how you need to make these align, and also the importance of making sure you set up a really good solid tripod in the cave. Okay, next step, now we're getting to the really cool stuff. Actually, you know what, before we do though, I just want to show you one thing that you need to keep in mind as you go throughout the rest of this tutorial. You'll notice that because I had to shift some layers, I'm getting this, this line up here. And that could potentially appear in your shot. So in the end, I may want to crop it down a little bit. To crop, you just use the crop tool. There should be some sort of crop tool. And you can drag that in a little bit and crop it out. So I'm not going to do that now. Let's cancel that. But you'll just need to keep that in mind. All right, so now the cool stuff. So the next step is to blend these layers together. And the way we do that is using blending modes. So a blending mode basically allows one layer to blend with the other using different algorithms depending on the mode that you select. The one that we're going to be using is up here in the drop-down menu. This is the blending mode drop-down menu. It's set to normal right now, which basically shows the pixels as they are and doesn't blend. We're going to be using lighten and screen. These two, what they do, Photoshop or whatever application you're using, will look at the pixels in this layer and the one beneath it, and whichever is the lightest pixel, it will show. Let me show what I'm talking about. So let's select lighten. Pretty cool. Did you notice that? Notice how it took the lighter pixels from this layer and it showed them through with the lighter pixels from this other area. So the shadows are suddenly filled in with the lighter of the 2 pixels. Let's go down to this next layer and let's again select light. And actually, before we do that, let's change that to screen and see what the difference is. You notice there's a slight difference there in how the pixels are blended. You can see it right here where the caver's at. So we change that to screen and there's a bit more of a haze. I kind of like the screen a little bit more, so I'm going to use that. So let's go to the next layer and again click screen. Bam! Pretty cool. Go down to the next one and we'll select screen. Now the beauty of this technique is when I'm underground shooting, if I were to have the person pop a light and then pop another one and pop another one, all while the shutter is open, and then I look at the back of the frame and I'm like, oh yeah, we need to tweak this a little bit. Why don't we turn this light off, or let's add this one over here. I then have to go through that process again. And if that exposure took like 5 minutes, that's 5 and then 10 and 15, 20, 30 minutes. But I've gone through and just fired it all over the place. I now have the ability to turn on and off lights here in Photoshop. So if I say, that front and center one, I don't really like it, I'm going to turn that off. I'm basically turning on and off flashes now after the fact here in Photoshop. This is really cool, really powerful. Okay, let's keep going. So let's change that one to lighten. And I believe I can select, let's select the top one, select that. So I click the first one, hold the shift key down, click the last one I want to grab, and let's change all those to lighten. And there we go. So these all now have that lighten effect applied to them. And look at this. So we go from, let's go back here to Lightroom. So we go back over here now to Lightroom. I started with all these individual shots that, are nothing too impressive, to creating this where the entire passage is lit up, but I also have the ability to go through and adjust the intensity of those and whether or not they actually even appear or not. So if I don't really want this light, I can turn this light on and off. If I don't like this one over here, I can adjust that. If maybe this first one was a little bit too bright, well, I can click on it and I can adjust the opacity or the fill to control how intense that effect is. Pretty cool, huh? So this basically gives me total control after the fact in adjusting the overall image. So now what we're going to look at is making global and then local adjustments to this shot. Because we look at it right now and overall it looks pretty good. But I'm looking at it saying, I wish this was a little bit brighter up here. And I'm getting kind of a weird effect right here where my friend happened to stand there and fire it off multiple times. So it's kind of just a hazy, weird, blurry thing. And maybe that's cool or maybe it's not. But how can we go in and have a little bit more control over adjusting this and bringing in just the layer that we want to bring in? And maybe I look at it and say, I don't know if I like this light or the fact the caver's there. That's a little weird. So let's go through and look at how we can make those adjustments. So the first thing I want to show you when it comes to making those adjustments is how to use masks in Photoshop. And masks, again, is a common concept that's in a lot of different editing programs. The way that mask works, I'm going to create a new layer here. And I'm just going to fill it with a color. So let's just fill it with this red here. So we'll go up to Edit and then down to Fill. And we'll say Fill with the foreground color. Okay. So right now this is just a layer that's sitting on top of all of my other layers. But let's say that this was a layer that I wanted to show, just a little bit of the red, kind of right in the center. But I want to do it what's called non-destructively. The difference between non-destructive and destructive is that non-destructive doesn't destroy any pixels. I mean, they're always still there, whereas destructive does. Let me show you an example of a destructive edit. So if I come over and take like the eraser tool here and click on that layer, and then I just go ahead and I erase, there's a hole in my layer now. Now, if it's a solid red color, it's no big deal. I can just refill it. But if this was an image and I close my file and then I reopen it, this hole is still going to be there. And there is nothing I can do to bring that back if it was an image, other than hopefully I have that layer somewhere else and I can re-import it. But it's gone. A non-destructive edit, so I'm going to hit Control Z. I use a layer mask. So I'm going to click on this layer and come down here and click on this little icon to create a layer mask. And now if I paint white or black on this layer mask, it will do pretty much the same effect, but it will be non-destructive. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. I've got black selected. I'm going to go ahead and paint. Now you notice I've painted a hole, but if I were to close and open this page, notice that that red is still solid because it's just sort of a virtual hole. If I swap this now and paint white, it erases that hole. It covers it back up, and I'm back to my original image. So if this was a photograph and not just a solid red layer, that would be important because maybe I come back and say, ooh, I wish I wouldn't have erased all that. Well, I can go through and fine tune that. So we're going to talk now about using masks here on our different layers. So let's go ahead and delete this layer. And I think what we'll do is, first of all, let's figure out which layer do we really want there in the center. I kind of like that one. I really like the silhouette. So I want to keep this, but I want the others that have the caver in the center, like this one. I want that caver to go away. So let's click here. Let's add a mask to this layer. Come over and we'll grab our black so we can paint a hole. And I'm going to change the size of my brush. To do that, I can, there's a couple of options. I can go into, let's see, where is the hard old-fashioned way? Is this the brush mode, toggle brush settings panel? There we go. So I can click on brush settings and I can come in here and I can adjust the hardness and the spacing and the size of the brush. But that takes a lot of time and energy, and I don't like to waste time and energy. So I use the keyboard shortcut, left and right bracket. Left bracket goes, let's see, that's the right bracket. Right bracket goes bigger, left bracket goes smaller. And if you hold the shift key down and hit the left and right bracket, shift and right bracket go softer, so it's a really, really soft feathered edge. And the left bracket, or actually no, reverse that. So shift and right bracket go hard. And so what I mean by hard and edgy is, if I click there, notice how it's a really sharp edge. And if I hold the shift key down and hit left bracket, now it's really soft. So I'll click right here to paint a hole. And you see how it's really, really soft and feathered. So I'm going to go somewhere in between, and let's make our brush a little bit bigger. And let's go ahead and get rid of this caver here. So actually I'm going to make it really soft. So let's hit shift way down, and we'll drag that out. Now that was a little bit too intense. So another thing that I can do on my brush is I can come over here to, where's that at? Right up here. Brush opacity. Let's take that brush opacity down. Let's take the flow down a little bit. And that will make it so that it's not such a strong effect. All right, we got rid of that. Let's see if that caver appears anywhere else. Yeah, right there. So let's click here. Let's add a mask. And let's go ahead and remove that caver there. And also we don't want that one, so we'll add another mask. Erase that. Showing up, a little bit bright there. Let's actually see how that looks though. Oh no. Let's get rid, oops. So I'm getting red there because I've painted red now on my layer. That's a bad thing. That's a destructive edit. So, because I painted on the layer. So let's hit Control or Command Z. If I need to go multiple times, if I do something like this, I need to hold down the Control Option key, Control Option Z, or just come up here to edit and then to step backward. So let's add our layer mask. Oops, I accidentally double clicked on that layer, which opened the layer style, so cancel that. Just click once. Open our mask, and again, let's paint this away. There we go. And then our final center image, we'll go ahead and create another mask here. And we'll erase the caver, but I still kind of want some of that effect on the bottom. So I'm going to hit X on my keyboard. That's going to swap black and white here. So X swaps black and white. Right now it's white. So that's going to bring back some of that effect, but I don't want those feet. So I'm going to zoom in real close here. And let's make our brush particularly small. And let's just paint out the caver there, because I like that light effect. All right, zoom out. I think we got all the cavers. Let's bring back those layers. Voila. Look at that. So I've erased all of the cavers. I bring the lighting effect back, and I get this really amazing silhouette over here that I like. I'm going to erase this too. Let's find out what layer that's on. I'll turn them all off. Let's see, what am I getting here? I got another problem too. I got this weirdy thing right there. So let's delete that. We'll add a mask to this layer. Let's make our brush a little bit bigger. Whoops, what'd I do? I'll tell you what I did. I cut a hole in the, this isn't a destructive edit. I basically cut a hole in this image with the mask. I can paint white and it'll come back, you'll see. Oops. Let's make our brush a little bit bigger and change the flow on that sucker. Bring that back. But there was nothing underneath it, so I'm seeing basically the transparency underneath it. So let's give that a try again. So swap it to black. Whoa. Let's change that. Make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Let's turn these layers on and see what happens. See, that disappears. And if you're still seeing a little bit of the transparency, you can always shift the order of this. So I could move this up to the top and then turn these layers on, and it's acting weird. Let's bring it back down. Oh, you know why is the effect not showing up? Well, it's because this one didn't have a blending mode applied to it. So let's take that to screen. Bam, there we go. Okay. So I've taken care of that little weird light that was hanging out there. Let's move this back down to the bottom. You'll notice too there's a slight shift as I move this around and how it blends. So you may want to play with the order of your layers, and that may give you a nicer effect. All right, we got to focus on that guy. Got a little distracted there. It's not that one, not that one. There it is. So let's erase this character if we don't like him. So we'll click here, we'll add our layer mask, and let's go ahead and paint black on that. That's good. Turn on these other layers. And there we go. Now, maybe I need to erase a little bit more because it's a little bit bright right in there. So we'll take that down. Again, I've got the flow dialed down and the opacity. So as I click, the first time it's only bringing in a small percentage, and a little bit more and a little bit more. It allows me to sort of fine tune that. And this is looking pretty good, except for the fact that I need this to be a little bit brighter. I want to try it and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go to the very top, click on this top layer, and I'm going to add down here let's see, what's a better way to do this so you guys can see, an adjustment layer. So I've got all my adjustment layers here. I can also click on this, and a drop-down menu appears as being cut off here on the screen, but all of those are listed up here. I'm going to add let's do a curves adjustment layer. So I'll click on this, and it's added a new layer that allows me to make an adjustment to my image. So let's see. Let's actually minimize this. Or better yet, go ahead and move this sucker over here. All right, so this is going to be a global adjustment. Because it's sitting on the top of everything here, if I make the adjustment, it affects the entire image. So we'll play with curves. If you want to know exactly how this curves tool functions, I'm not going to go into the details of it. Look it up online. You'll find all kinds of tutorials on how to use curves. So I'm just going to make a global adjustment. And when I do that, some areas are a little too bright. So the cool thing is, put this back over here to get it out of the way. Cool thing is that adjustment layers come with a mask. So I can click right here and I'm going to fill this entire layer with black. What's that going to do? Basically cut a hole in the entire effect. So we'll select black, go up to edit and fill, or I can hit, let's see, Option Delete or Alt Delete. That's the keyboard shortcut to fill. And now I'm going to paint with white where I want that effect. So let's get a bigger brush. Let's hit X. So I swap to white. And then we'll go ahead and bring that in just over here on the side. There we go. Maybe a little bit over here and up over here. All right. That's looking much nicer. Bring in that foreground a little bit. And there we go. So I think at this point, I'm going to call it done. Now, if I were working on this personally and not for this tutorial, I would probably spend a lot more time going in and trying different things, turning layers on and off, shuffling the order, adjusting the opacity, playing with the mask, doing all kinds of things. Maybe I'd even, you know, right now I've got the silhouette here and the silhouette here. Maybe I'd try doing it without a silhouette and use that first layer, which, let's go back here to Lightroom, be easier to get to it this way. This layer where the caver's facing me, maybe that would actually end up looking better overall. So since you have the flexibility now to turn on and to turn off lights, so I can turn this light on, this light off, and that light off, play around with variations, because sometimes just, you know, turning on every single light is not the best option. Sometimes you can get a better effect by cutting down some lights and creating some dark zones in the shot. Maybe that is a better shot. I don't know. That's something that you have to decide, and I would encourage you to play around with lots of variations, because it could be that just around the corner, if you try something, some subtle adjustment, it may be the difference between a really good shot and an unbelievable shot. So spend some time playing around, making adjustments, and seeing what you can do. Now, one more thing that I wanted to show you. Let's say that there was one light in particular that you wanted to brighten. So let's say that, let's find a good one. All right, this one right here, this right light. So I want to make an adjustment, but only to this layer, a lightness adjustment. If I go over here and I create another adjustment layer, or come up here and create another adjustment layer, that adjustment layer appears at the top. Now, let's close this and drag it down because I wanted it, I think it was this layer. Now, this adjustment layer is not going to affect just this layer, but everything from here down. So in order for it to apply only to this layer, here's the secret. Hold the Option or the Alt key down, hover in between the layers with your mouse, and notice how the cursor changes. If you do that and then click, that layer becomes indented, and now this layer only affects, or this adjustment layer only affects this one layer. So if I come back over here to the properties and I make an adjustment now, notice it is only affecting that one layer. Pretty cool, huh? So now I have full control of just that one light. I can increase or decrease the intensity of that one light to get the effect that I want. So again, don't just settle. Don't just slap all your layers in here and then go through and change the blending mode and then say, hey, that looks good. Play with some of these curves adjustments. Now it's going to take some time. I remember when I was teaching Photoshop, you know, at the community college, that I'd have a lot of students that as soon as you start introducing masks on multiple layers, they look at it and it's like, okay, so if I adjust this mask, then it's going to affect this. So why is it not affecting it? Like, what's going on? Because it's really easy to get confused with the huge volume of layers. So what I would do, what I would recommend, is start simple. Try doing a shot where you just take, you have two different images that you light up and you composite those two images into two layers, and you work with just two layers to start off with. And then maybe you try 3 or 4 layers, and then you can go a whole bunch. It's going to be a lot easier to make sense of, just a couple of layers than it is these like 10 layers that we have right here. So start small, master these concepts, build on it, and then you'll be able to accomplish some really powerful things. So what do you think? Pretty cool stuff, huh? And I think at this point, you've got a very, very powerful set of tools for walking away with some mind-boggling shots. Now, we're not done yet. Still have to show you how to composite video with stills, which we'll get to. And then at that point, got a few more things to wrap up, and then we're going to send you off to blow everybody's mind with some of the shots you're going to walk away with after taking this course.